at News Talk STL.
Okay.
Good afternoon, St. Louis. This is Paul Kurtman here on News Talk STL. And what a week it's been with the weather that we've had here in St. Louis, of course. Paul, as you know, we had the Defense of Liberty event scheduled for Thursday night. The Defense of Liberty event that was scheduled with Donald Trump Jr., Seth Dillon of the Babylon Bee, Cecilia Johnson, the Director of Black Engagement for the RNC, Tim Jones, State Senator Bill Eigel, I think State Treasurer Scott Fitzpatrick was going to be there. We just had a whole host of people that were going to be there. And, of course,
unbelievable. The
weather came in and flights started getting canceled. And so we had to push off and reschedule an event that has already been rescheduled once.
I saw that announcement and I thought, Kurtman, no! I mean, I know how hard you have worked and have worked and, the money and all that. I just can't believe it. It's horrible.
So it's okay, though, because the event is all still together. We have rescheduled it for April 21st. Great. And it's going to be a good event. And it's going to be when we're having a little bit more warmer weather. So we don't have to worry about it being rescheduled again.
Yeah, you don't have it in the back of your mind like, okay, February, I don't know.
If we have any weather in April that causes it to be rescheduled, then I just might have to cancel it altogether because that would be really bad luck to have that kind of weather.
An act of God comes through.
That kind of weather in April. So, hey, listen, there's a couple things that we're going to be talking about today. I want to talk a little bit about, in the first segment, I want to talk a little bit about something that I had talked with Mike Ferguson yesterday. Mike Ferguson, Ken Williams, and Gabe Pfeiffer. I had called in. I was on their show yesterday morning. We talked a little bit about this tweet that Governor Parson sent out. Mm-hmm. And are you familiar with this, Paul? What he put out about hiring somebody, putting somebody on his cabinet.
Was it Christian?
That shares his Christian values.
I saw it briefly this morning.
Okay.
Tell us.
So now he put out this quote where he said that he wants to nominate somebody to this position within his cabinet that shares his Christian values. And of course now there is a huge complaint from an organization acted in a disgraceful manner by capitulating to an anti-vaccination fringe and commend you for saying so publicly. Government officials denying science have interfered with the country's ability to combat deadly global pandemic, blah, blah, blah. They go on. However, in your tweet in question, you needlessly and inappropriately inserted religion into the discussion of whether or not, and I always mess up this name, Kauroff, should have been confirmed. You imply that only Christians are fit to serve in Missouri as public officials are appointed or appointed officials. So Governor Parson, he had a tweet. I think this is it. Okay, Missourians know that I share these beliefs and would not, this is Governor Parson's tweet, I think from earlier this month, from February 2nd. Missourians know that I share these beliefs and would not have nominated somebody who does not share the same Christian values. So this is the tweet in question. This is the statement in question that the freedom of religion, they say you inappropriately inserted religion. So the question that we were discussing yesterday with Mike Ferguson had a little bit to do with, is it okay? Is it okay for a governor, for anybody, to make a political appointment if they're looking for somebody that shares their own Christian values? Now, here's my position on this. I do believe that it would be wrong for the government to force the people of our state to abide by any one religious mandate, doctrine, whatever, believe anything, right?
Sure.
But I also believe that when you elect a governor, the people are telling you, we want you to be our governor. We want you to lead. And a lot of times governors run on their values of faith or home values or whatever. And so we would almost expect it. They didn't even ask about what values are you talking about because maybe many of those people share the same values. They're just incensed that Governor Parson would put out in a tweet that he would identify that particular set of his values, of his value system, as Christian values. And so they want him to remove a tweet, which to this point he has not yet removed. But this is such a problem. We're going to talk about this later. If you go to paulkurtman.com and you scroll to the bottom, you'll see radio number 34. And on radio number 34, the title is The Awokening of Joe Rogan, because a lot of people have been talking about this. It's all across social media. Joe Rogan has been under attack by, of all people, right, Neil Young. Neil Young, who's Canadian, right? Isn't Neil Young,
Yes.
Young a Canadian?
Yes.
A Canadian who certainly...
Very moody Canadian.
Very moody Canadian. Certainly isn't an expert or a doctor in his own right. Neil Young has chosen to follow the belief system of the mainstream narrative where almost it seems like everything related to COVID is concerned. Certainly, it doesn't sound like he's not a Joe Rogan follower. He's not a listener to the Joe Rogan podcast. If he was, I think he would be less likely to try to get him censored. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about this in the second segment because Joe Rogan just this morning put out a video where he's apologizing for some things that he said. And I want to talk a little bit about the context of the context that he's talking about. The reason the woke crowd is winning so much across the country is because people are living in fear. People don't have a desire to fight for the truth as much as maybe generations in the past have had. We've had people that have put everything on the line. They've sacrificed their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor, all in an effort to get to the bottom of something, to find the real truth. But today we have people that aren't looking for the truth of something. They're not willing to say, hey, if you want to, let's keep things in context here so we make sure that we understand what's really happening, what's really being said. Where's the truth at? Instead, people are just becoming so afraid of being labeled a racist or a bigot or a homophobe. And what it's doing, the actual effect that this is having is it is stifling speech. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I actually have the clip that Joe Rogan released just this morning on his social media page.
What did Joe do now? Snap. Mike, I don't. If I didn't know, what did Joe do? I don't know. If you didn't say it.
Okay, so I'm going to play this clip
okay.
in the second segment.
Yeah, okay.
But basically what it is Joe Rogan on his podcast over the last several years, and it's something that he hasn't said in recent years, but there was a particular context in which he used the N word. And of course, everybody knows what word that is, right?
Yes.
So somebody has put together clips of him saying that, and it's just real fascinating when he's apologizing for it. He says a couple things in his apology video that lead me to believe that he doesn't want to be saying, he doesn't want to be apologizing. He doesn't want to come across as just kowtowing to the woke mob, but still he's beginning to do some of it anyway. So he apologizes for what he says, but then he defends the context in which he says it, and then he turns right around and says there's no context in which this is right to say. It's a really fascinating clip to listen to because I think you can... Joe Rogan, the reason he has such a big following is because he's okay having the hard questions asked. He's okay asking hard questions and engaging in difficult conversations. He has people on he disagrees with. I mean, here's a guy who has one of the largest podcasts in the world, right? Yeah. Arguably.
Yeah.
But he'll still have a conversation about aliens while he's smoking marijuana.
Yes, that needs to be
on the microphone, right? And he'll have
really?
He'll have conversations with people about stuff that nobody cares about, but it's for him, and in the moment they don't know where the podcast is going. They just wind up having
for 2.5 hours.
Never held himself out as an expert, right, on any of these issues. He's just having conversations.
Yeah.
And so when you do that, when you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds or thousands of podcasts, as in the case of Joe Rogan, you're going to have conversations where maybe you don't mean for something to come across bad. And he actually talks about an instance where that happened on his podcast, but you still need to apologize for it. And I get that. I understand it. But here's the thing, though. If there is such thing as truth, and there is such thing as context, it should 100% absolutely matter. And just because you say words that are offensive, if they're meant to be offensive, then apologize for sure. But if they're not meant to be offensive, if they're being said, for example, in an academic setting, right, where people are discussing or debating, or you have to rely on quotes in order to move the conversation forward, so you read a quote from the past,
Oh,
There are times where you might say words that are offensive, but not in the context of being offensive, but in the context of discussion in order to move the needle of progress.
And education, and then I know what you're saying. That's very interesting.
Yeah. And so the situation that we have here with Governor Parson from earlier this week, basically they're wanting to cancel his tweets and cancel Governor Parson's ability to talk about how his Christian values are important to him as a governor, which of course we would all expect the governor we elected to bring people onto his cabinet. This is his prerogative. This is what he can do because he's the governor. It's his cabinet. He can bring in whoever he wants. They just have to be appointed and cleared by the Senate. He can bring in whoever he wants. And it would make sense that if we elected him because we agree with Governor Parson's value system, whether it's Christian or not, if we elected him to do that, it makes sense that we would also expect him to bring in other people on his cabinet who share those same views. And having the same Christian values, sharing the same Christian values is not the same as sharing the same Christian faith. What I think is part of my Christian value system, somebody else might be like, well, I'm not a Christian, so I wouldn't call those my Christian values. I would call those just my values of humanity. Thou shalt not kill. Values. So if he just wants to say these are my Christian values because that's where I derive this value system from, nothing wrong with that until somebody comes out from the freedom from religion because they don't want to be offended. Governor Parson isn't forcing anybody else to be a Christian. He's not doing that at all. He just says in a tweet, I'm going to find somebody that just shares my same Christian values. We're talking about somebody for like a department that deals with health and dealing with people's lives, right? So would it make sense that Governor Parson would want to have somebody else who has the same worldview on life that it should be protected as him?
Yeah.
Doesn't it make sense?
You said it, not my same Christian religion.
Yeah.
My Christian values.
Yeah.
And this is on the TV news. I've seen this talked about this morning. I mean, this is not, you would think, okay, freedom of religion, yeah, right, you're going to have a problem with it. But it's a story.
It's a real story because somebody doesn't want to have their government leaders even mention the word Christianity. If he would have left the word Christianity out, they wouldn't have had a problem with it. But they have a problem with the fact that he brought in that he related his value system to his own Christian faith. And so that's the reason why the freedom from religion. But you know what? This is America. You're not supposed to be free from anything except coercion. And there's nothing in this tweet that coerces anybody to believe anything.
Yeah.
Or says, hey, we're going to write laws that are all theocratic.
Yeah. Man.
People just don't understand.
I was offended.
People that want to be free from something don't understand freedom. You can't be free. You can't just pick and choose what you want to be free from. Part of freedom means that you also have to let other people have their freedom. And if somebody else's freedom means that they're going to, from time to time, say, hey, I'm a Christian, or they're going to put out a tweet, whether it's a public official or not, hey, I'm going to make sure that my advisors share my same set of values. You just got to let them do it. That's how freedom works. Governor Parson...
Extraordinary point.
Governor Parson also has his own freedom that should be protected.
Yeah. Freedom from is not freedom.
Freedom from is not freedom. There was my church one time was building a new building, and one of the neighbors had a problem with it. They wanted to try to get the permits denied because they did not want to look over the tree line and see a steeple.
Oh.
And this is a situation that at some point has already gone to the Supreme Court.
Man.
From what I understand, and know that I'm not a lawyer, so I'm certainly not an expert here, but you don't have a freedom from a particular view. And so this is how we were able to say, hey, listen, we're on a separate piece of property. You don't want to look over a tree line and just see the top of a steeple. The government's not going to protect your freedom from a particular view. So the church gets to build their building. We already had one building. They said the church is going to build a building. They're going to put a steeple on it. And if you don't like to look and see the very tippity top of a steeple on the other side of a tree line on a completely separate piece of property,
not your property,
just don't look that direction.
Yeah. Wow.
But freedom from is not freedom. You have to be, and this is where the left gets really confused when it comes to things like tolerance and what exactly that means and what freedom means.
Yeah, and controlling. It's about controlling other people, isn't it?
It is.
With fear.
It is. This is Paul Kerben. Hey, when we come back, we're going to play this Joe Rogan clip. We're going to dig into this just a little bit right here in News Talk STL. This is Paul Kerben. and Paul Cook in the studio today, and we'll be right back in just a couple minutes.
All right.
Okay.
This is News Talk STL.
I like that. That's really a great point, man. Freedom from. Because it's right. It's freedom from this. Like, oh my God. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, freedom from.
Did the church get built?
Yeah, church got built.
Good. And is your laptop on?
Laptop is on.
Okay.
Well, it's finally
I got you potted up.
winter.
That laptop. So whenever you want to hit it.
Okay.
And then we got
fur can do to keep you warm and cozy on those cold nights.
about 2.5.
Natural fur is the perfect insulation
Minutes.
against cold, wind, and snow. And it will last a lifetime with just a little care. The Fur and Leather Center has the largest selection of fox, mink, chinchilla, coats,
How much time do we got?
capes,
2 minutes.
and furs. Right now, the Fur and Leather Center is having their winter sale with 50% off their fabulous furs and up to 80% off gorgeous furs from last season. Come in today and get your warm on.
Jump over there real quick. I'll be right back.
Okay.
7901 Clayton Road. Or go to furcenter.com to see the most exciting luxurious furs and accessories.
And we're back.
For the best selection, stop in today at 7901 Clayton Road. The Fur and Leather Center.
In times of economic uncertainty and chaos, your money means nothing. You may not even be able to get it from your bank or ATM. And the money you do have in the stock market will go down and down. What you can bank on is gold and silver. Gold and silver have been a reliable and trusted form of currency for thousands of years. Gold and silver have never been worth zero, and typically gold holds its value during economic turmoil. Call the Gold Hotline now and learn how to protect your money and your assets with gold and silver. And learn how to set up a new IRA or roll over your current one into a gold-backed IRA. Protect your money from the next
Are the lights
market
okay?
crash with gold
Was
and
that-
silver.
Are the lights
Call
okay?
now
Yeah.
for your
Yeah, it's all good to me. Good.
800-281-4224.
The counter was kind of greasy.
800-281-4224. 800-281-4224. That's 800-281-4224. Do you have Medicare?
Somebody in
and
here
do you
eating fried
use a
chicken?
Yeah,
CPAP
exactly.
machine? This is a
Somebody
national
eating.
healthcare alert regarding your CPAP supplies. Using a clean CPAP mask and clean supplies.
Usually
is
engineers are
important to staying
relentless
healthy.
about that. They clean
Best
with
way to make
Q-tips.
sure your
The
CPAP
board.
equipment is clean
But
is
I don't
to
think
get
we have a
new
full-time
supplies.
engineer.
If you have Medicare, we have great news.
Kinda do.
Medicare will pay for you to have new clean supplies every 90 days. We'll even do all the paperwork for you to make sure that there's little to no out-of-pocket cost to you. And you don't even have to leave your home. We provide free in-home delivery. So if you're a CPAP user and you have Medicare, staying healthy with new CPAP equipment is easy. Just make this free phone call right now to get started.
Sponsored by Specialty Medical. 800-860-4610. 800-860-4610. 800-860-4610. That's 800-860-4614.
If you find yourself
About
feeling out
15.
of place in the world, it's comforting to know conservative values haven't been abandoned everywhere.
Thanks for being my voice in all this.
This is News Talk STL.
There are people out there that feel the way that I feel and say what I say.
Welcome home.
All right, I got you up.
All right.
Hello, friends. I'm making this video to talk about the most regretful and shameful thing that I've ever had to talk about publicly. There's a video that's out. It's a compilation of me saying the N-word. It's a video that's made of clips taken out of context of me of 12 years of conversations on my podcast, and it's all smushed together, and it looked horrible, even to me. Now, I know that to most people, there's no context where a white person is ever allowed to say that word, never mind publicly on a podcast. And I agree with that now. I have
Okay, I'm going to stop right there. There's a little bit more of this that we want to that we want to play. So just to bring people up to speed, this is Paul Kurtman, News Talk STL in the studio today with Paul Cook. And of course, one of the biggest controversies right now has been Neil Young wanting to pull his music off of Spotify if they did not cancel Joe Rogan, because Neil Young is saying that Joe Rogan is promoting COVID misinformation. Already, Joe Rogan has come out with one video saying, hey, listen, I have people that have all kinds of different positions on this issue. I've had people that disagree with me, don't disagree with me, but we just come on and have a conversation. Sometimes we don't even know where the conversation is going. We just want to have a conversation. He said, but I can do better. I'll try to have more people on that have these other views. And you know what? That's fine.
Right.
Whatever. You want to do that? It's your podcast to do it. But now, what has happened now? Now, this is something that people really need to be paying attention to, because the woke crowd, the woke left, they will not stop until you are completely have been canceled or you are in 100% submission to their agenda. They want to make sure that they can control you. They're going to tell you what you can and can't say. Now, here's the thing. Joe Rogan knows all of this. He has talked about this issue at length on his station or on his podcast.
Wokeness?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean,
Makes
he like lots of it. Libs of TikTok, which we play on here every month or every weekend. He is fully aware. But what's happened to Joe recently is they're still trying to get him canceled.
Yeah.
But since they can't get him canceled just on the COVID issue alone, now they're trying to find other ways. So what he is saying, he is saying, hey, listen, somebody out there, and these are his words. He said somebody out there has edited together a compilation of him saying the N-word completely out of context. There's no context to all of this. They just have bits of him saying this word, right? Oh. And he's saying, let me actually go back here and play this one part one more time.
Even to me. Now, I know that to most people, there's no context where a white person is ever allowed to say that word, never mind publicly on a podcast. And I agree with that now.
Okay, so what he's saying, this is where I think Joe Rogan is really making a fatal error. Listen, if you're saying that word in context, and he goes on and elaborates a little bit about what that context is, and I'll just kind of give you a little bit of a heads up on what that is. He's talking about, he's a comedian. Joe Rogan is a professional comedian. That is a big part of his livelihood. He just recently came off the road. He was doing a tour with Dave Chappelle. So he is a comedian. This is his profession. He is at the top of that hierarchy too, okay? So over the last several years, closer to 12 years ago than recently, he has said the N-word, but actually said the word in the context of comedic bits that he likes and appreciates from some of the people who he gains influence from. Some people like Richard Pryor, for example.
So almost repeating it
Yeah.
from what they said.
Right, and
Okay.
and these are and keep in mind, he has people on his podcast of all different colors, races, ethnic backgrounds, whatever. But where I think he's making a fatal error here, if he has decided, you know what, times are changing, I'm just not going to say that word, I get that too. That's one thing. But what he's done is he's gone further here, and he's saying there are some people who believe that a white person cannot say that word in any context. And I see that now. I agree with that now. So what he's doing now is he's not just trying to adjust and be a little bit more sensitive. He's actually making the statement that white people in any context, think about what he's saying here, in any context, there is no context in which a white person can use that word. Now, here's the question. We're going to have a little bit of this requires people to put on their thinking hat. Now listen, truth lives in the environment of context. You have to have context if you want to know what the truth is. Outside of context, you're not likely to find any truth. If you want truth, you have to have context. So Joe says right here, they put together this whole clip and it looks terrible. Even to me, it looks terrible even to me because the whole thing was put together outside of any context. And so he's apologizing for a clip that he himself says is not contained within the truth of the context in which he was using this word. Now, people can agree or disagree whether or not it was still okay for him to do that, but what he does is he goes further and he says there's no context. So I want to give you a couple examples here where I would say there absolutely is context, at least one.
Okay.
Okay? Now, I know there's people that are getting real nervous right now, but you don't got to be nervous, okay? Listen, all of this happens, but the context that I'm referring to is in the context of academia, okay? Here's a couple of examples. I got 3 examples here. Law professor, this is the title of a few articles here. 1, law professor sues over N-word suspension that says being white led to different treatment. There was a law professor named Professor Zweier who twice used the word, once in a classroom hypothetical and the second time in a discussion with black students about support for racial equality. Professor Zweier says his first use of the word was part of a teaching moment in his first year tort class in August 2018. He was discussing a case in which a hotel employee refused to serve a black person, and the law professor asked how the case would be different if the employee had actually used that word. And he said the word. And immediately he was called on for suspension or for firing. But here he is in an academic sense talking about the difference, legally speaking, between actually using an abbreviated word, like when people say the N-word, versus when people actually say the word. Now, if we're talking about a class in which a law professor is trying to explain the differences in the legal ramifications between, an abbreviated version and the actual word, is it a scenario in which that law professor is saying it because his intentions, his motivations are racist, or is it an academic situation in which he's trying to move the needle on the discussion in order to help a class understand the different dynamics that are at play when the both words. Now, here's the irony here. Now he knows because he used both of those words. The abbreviated version and the long form version is when he's trying to explain the differences to these students. Here's another example. A Stanford law professor read a quote in his class from Patrick Henry, which stirred outrage in the school. Now this is really interesting because we're talking about context here, right? This is the professor speaking, Stanford law professor. He says, I presented the quotation in its historical context. I emphasized that they were not my words and condemned their use. It is vitally important to teach the history of the American founding, warts and all, and not to, sugarcoat it, and not to sugarcoat it. So this law professor, at the same time, in order to teach the class, and in order to have a discussion about things that were at play, the racial dynamics that were at play at the very beginning of the country, he used the word, and they were calling on him to be fired or suspended.
Wow.
So we're talking about context here, right?
Yeah.
Here's another one.
Wow.
This one also is kind of interesting. There was, I think this might have been at the University of Chicago. One academic says, yes, there is a case for using offensive words in classrooms in certain situations. That's the title of this column. And so I'm going to read a little clip from it here. Students had called for the professor named Kilborn to be disciplined after he wrote a civil procedure exam related to employment discrimination that included, this is interesting, redacted versions of the epithets, the N-word and the B-word, which he describes as profane expressions for African Americans and women. Now, what's interesting here, at the same time, just for using the abbreviated N word, we had a professor that came after him for saying that, for using the abbreviated word. Other professors were about ready to join that whole movement until they found out, he didn't actually say it. He used the abbreviated words in a civil procedure exam related specifically to employment discrimination.
Like what not to do, or like this is inflammatory, don't do this.
Right.
And he was in trouble.
So another professor kind of started to come to his defense when they realized, they didn't actually say the words. And they said, what bothers me is that we are not only incapable of having intelligent conversations about these issues, employment discrimination in this case, but if we can't even bring up a respectfully abbreviated version of the word that comes up in the employment discrimination context, then where are the boundaries? So what we see here is we see a progression of people trying to say these are words that you can't use to these are words you can't even reference. In the example of context that I'm saying, where I believe that it would be okay within the context of academia. This is one example of context where law professors, 3 cases here where law professors are specifically talking about the legal ramifications in the use of these words versus other words.
Yeah.
And in order to differentiate between the words, they would wind up saying them as a matter of the discussion, even with the disclaimers that these are not my words. I'm reading quotes. These are from cases in the past. We're having a mock trial. The defendant was quoted as having said this, and this, and this, and then suddenly there's calls for them to be fired.
Yeah, like, so as a matter of record, you get it, the information out there. That's the context. As a matter of record, you have to give the word, maybe, in that situation. Or at least that's how that law professor thinks, and it's not in the way you would expect.
And so the question is this. Joe Rogan says white people, there's never a context in which they can use these words. So what he's doing is he's saying all white people, at this point, there's no context, and if you are using these words, well, then there's, these are not words, it's insensitive and it's racist. And then he goes on to say a little bit more.
Years, but for a long time, when I would bring that word up, like if it would come up in conversation, instead of saying the N word, I would just say the word. I thought as long as it was in context, people would understand what I was doing.
See, most reasonable people do. This is why when it's in the context of law professors using it to explain, to teach a legal lesson, give a class, right? Most reasonable people would say, hey, there's a context here that's not racist, but we're talking about race relations, and so there might come a time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that context was part of the clip we were talking about Red Fox, how Red Fox said that word on television in the 1970s, and how times have changed so much since then. Or about how Richard Pryor used it as one of the titles of one of his albums. Or I was quoting a Lenny Bruce bit, or I was quoting a Paul Mooney bit, or I was talking about how Quentin Tarantino used it repeatedly in Pulp Fiction, or I was talking about how a Netflix executive, ironically, used it because he was trying to compare it to another offensive word, and he said it out loud, and they fired him.
That's a really interesting example there. A Netflix executive using that word, comparing it to another highly offensive word, because they're in the entertainment industry and they don't want to be, needlessly offensive or come across as racist.
Right.
So they're having these discussions. But what happens to the Netflix executive? They fire him as though he is a racist, right? So we have to understand that truth lives on a platform of context. And so context is very important. And so if somebody's not racist, but they're using it in an academic sense, or if they're using it in a sense of, here's the words that we're not going to use, and they actually list one of those words. Yeah. This actually happened, I think, to a law professor in Texas. They said, here's a list of words we're not going to use, and they wrote out that word, or they said that word as they were reading the list, and there were calls for that person to be fired.
Oh, wow.
Context is important.
What about this? What about Joe Rogan context? He's talking Joe Rogan context, not, he said all context. But,
Sure.
And so maybe the context of the context is Joe should never use that word, no matter what, is what Joe's saying.
If Joe's saying that Joe should never use that word, I'm 100% with him.
Yeah.
People should be able to make whatever decisions that they want. But the problem that I have with Joe is him saying there is never a context in which anybody, a white person, he says white people should use that word. But apparently there is. When you're trying, at least I would think so. If the context is, here's the words we're not going to use, but now that's not, you can't even do that. As we found out when a professor in Texas, there were calls for firing her because in the list of things, and this is an old story, I'm trying to remember exactly what school it was at, but it was a list, here's things that are offensive, words we're not going to say. Oh, how dare you say that one in the list of words that no one's allowed to say or use. It's just getting out of hand and crazy.
Why do you think Joe says this? Fear? I mean, not the N word, but
why this apology
this morning?
Yeah. I do think that it stems from some fear. He does not want to be labeled a bigot or a racist, and so even though he knows that these words were said out of context, he's afraid that the next immediate jump, which apparently seems to already be happening, is that Joe Rogan's a racist and a bigot. And so even though he's apologizing, which I'm fine with, I'm totally fine with that, but then part of his apology is defending what he said. So I think that there's a struggle here. Here's a guy who is the tip of the spear for free speech right now, and he wants so bad to be free and be able to say things. He's not an offensive guy.
He's become important, more important.
That's why they're coming for him. That's why they're coming for him. How much more time do we got here?
Not much, buddy.
Okay.
On the other
hey,
side.
We're on the other side of this. We're gonna play the rest of this clip, and then we're gonna hit a little bit of libs of TikTok, maybe even a little bit of more Missouri news. For philosophical reasons, this is an important discussion to be having today. This is Paul Kurtman here at News Talk. Here's the main message. If there's one context in which it would make sense for somebody to use these words, such as what I just listed from academics,
Yep.
maybe there's another one. It seems the one context nobody should tolerate is a context that is racially motivated. We should know that and agree on that.
Yeah.
But if there's one context where I think reasonable people would say, no, that makes sense. Like if you're listing words you're not going to allow in class, you shouldn't be fired because you listed one of the words that you're not going to allow to be used.
I totally agree. Because they have to know the word. What's the word? I mean, maybe you never know. You're getting it as a matter of record.
It's
horrible word.
From the left, though, it's all about control.
That's what it is.
And it's rooted in Marxism. It's rooted in Marxism. You want to take down a guy who's the tip of the spear on free speech right now? You can't get him because you can't get him because he's made $100 million off of Spotify. Let's get him by putting together an out of context compilation of words that he's used. And that's how they do it.
And even if it is, that's a really good point. That he's become important. Go after him, and it has really little to do with race. But might as well swoop that up in there. The problem I have is if he's talking about repeating what Red Fox said. If it's an educational, maybe what not to or whatever. But if this was funny, boom, boom, boom. Here's what Red Fox said. Do you know what I mean? I still think that's offensive. Or quoting Samuel L. Jackson. I don't think. To be honest, I don't think white guys should be able to do that.
Why? I mean, if you're having a conversation, and I'm not defending.
I know what you mean.
What I'm saying is this: if you're a comedian, if you're a profession, if your skill set is comedy, and you're talking about people that you draw influence from, and you're talking about the craft of forming a joke, if a white person repeats what Red Fox said in that context, it's not the context of racism. It's not. I don't see it that way because I don't think it's not like you can change it and suddenly be like, okay, let's all go put on our hoods. Like you're being.
Is that part of the funny, not funny, Joe Rogan? Funny. Red Fox said it to be funny, to hit maybe to more black folks, and then Joe Rogan is repeating it as a white guy.
What I'm saying is, if Joe Rogan did that, a reasonable person would not say, "Oh, Joe Rogan's a racist."
Oh yeah.
And so if everybody knows, and if everybody agrees, you're not a racist. You're a comedian talking about the craft of other comedians and how they set up jokes. I don't think you should have to apologize. I think that the reason people edit compilations together is specifically to inflame people outside of context.
Yeah.
And I don't think Joe Rogan, I think if he doesn't want to say it, that's his conviction, but I don't feel like he should have to apologize for something that he did 12 years ago in the context of his own craft on his podcast. Like he's not
12 years ago.
Racist. He's not racially motivated. He's using these words in another context. And whether he should or shouldn't have done it, I wouldn't have done it. He did, but I don't think you should have to apologize. Just because somebody does something that I don't feel like I would do, I don't feel like, hey, I wouldn't do it, but if you did it, I'm not going to tell you have to apologize.
And you're a freedom guy. What about this? What about defining context? I mean, I'm just saying, you're saying it, maybe everyone doesn't define it the same way. I'm not saying you're not. I'm saying maybe you should define it on the air. What you think context is. I know it sounds basic, but maybe people don't even think about it.
Yeah, we can do that.
If you're still talking about it.
All right, we are back. News Talk STL. This is Paul Kurtman in studio today with Paul Cook, having an interesting conversation about these dynamics of. This is where the woke left is coming after a guy who right now is the tip of the spear around these issues of free speech, and since they couldn't get him on COVID, now they're trying to get him on things that he said 12 years ago, and it completely. To me, it's not a. It's and I think any reasonable person would agree. It's not a racially motivated context when you have a comedian talking about other comedians who have influenced him in bits that he has enjoyed, and has helped him. I'm trying to play the rest of this clip here from Joe Rogan.
Out loud.
There we go.
I was also talking about how there's not another word like it in the entire.
This is an interesting
Because it's
bit.
a word where only one group of people is allowed to use it, and they can use it in so many different ways. Like if a white person says that word, it's racist and toxic. But a black person can use it, and it could be a punchline. It could be a term of endearment. It could be lyrics to a rap song. It could be a positive affirmation. It's a very unusual word, but it's not my word to use.
And I am perfectly fine. If anybody has that conviction, it's not my word to use, like no matter what. That's kind of where I'm at on it. Like it's not a word that I say. It's not. I'm not going to do that.
too,
you
totally,
know.
yes.
But some people, like we talked about these law professors who have found themselves in an academic situation where necessarily they're required to say it whenever they're reading quotes or something. Should that be allowed?
For years I used it in that manner. I never used it to be racist because I'm not racist. But whenever you're in a situation where you have to say, I'm not racist, you up.
So this is an area where I think he's wrong about this too. The reason a lot of people, I'll tell you right now, okay? I've heard people be called racist because they were talking about however when they drive downtown in St. Louis, they'll lock their doors in their car. And I've heard people say, oh, that's just racist. No, it's not racist. St. Louis City is actually one of the murder capitals of America. I don't live in St. Louis City. Whenever I have to drive around in downtown St. Louis, the reason there's locks on my car door that I can lock them from the inside is so if I'm inside, I can lock people out, right? And if you're going to drive around in one of the murder capitals of America, it just makes sense that you might lock your door. So is it a racist thing? No, it's not a racist thing.
That's presumptuous that the crime is going to be from an African American too. I mean, there's plenty of white
It
people.
is. So when
roll up on you.
when somebody says, "Oh, that's just racist," well then, no. You're the one saying that it's racist because you just are assuming that if anybody's talking about crime, they can only be talking about minorities. But the thing is like what Rogan says here is he says if you ever find yourself in a situation where you have to say I'm not racist, well then you've just messed up. Well, that's not true. The reason people feel like they have to preface some of their statements by saying I'm not racist, it's because people always presuppose that if you have anything to say that anybody could interpret as being racially motivated, even if it's not. Even if in the case of these law professors, you're talking about, you're literally quoting somebody from a court case because it's relevant to the court case. You have to preface it by saying, I'm not a racist. In fact, one of these law professors said in here, I'm reading a quote from the law professor. I presented the quotation in its historical context. And then the law professor puts in their own disclaimer. I emphasize that they were not my words, and I condemned their use. But there were still calls, a law professor reading a quote in a law class because it's materially relevant for the education of these law students to understand what is being said and how that's being interpreted by the law or by the debate in a previous court case. So when Joe Rogan says if you ever find yourself saying I'm not racist, but here's some things that we need to consider, or here's this. That's not true. That if you ever have to say that, well then that means you are, which is kind of what he's implying, which is what the left implies.
Yeah, that's a big blanket.
Yeah, that is not true. And so truth lives on the platform. It dwells. It thrives on a platform of context. And so people in the far left and the woke have always done so well at this because people are afraid to be called a racist for even having a conversation like these law professors do in their own classroom. And that's one context where I think that we need to have some academic liberty in order to move the needle on education, especially where our legal system's concerned. I mean, isn't that what we want now? We want a strong, vibrant justice system that can actually find justice for people. How can we do that if we lock people out of the conversation based on the color of their skin?
Truth is what you're talking about. But Paul, I mean, there's many people that believe if you're white, you shouldn't have anything to say about race. Do you know what I mean? Today, now, that, and I think you should be able to have a discussion. But there's a lot of people that I've noticed that don't think you should even be able to talk about it.
we've got just probably a couple more minutes here. So let me say this. The solution to speech you don't like is not to cancel that speech. It is more speech. Because you don't change the world, you don't change the country, you don't change society or the culture by marginalizing people and shutting them up and forcing them to be quiet. You change the culture by changing their minds, by changing their hearts. There's a reason that the military, since early days of military actions, has always had what amounts to a civil affairs campaign. You want to change the hearts and minds of people. I can take you all the way back to King Cyrus, Persian emperor, when he invaded what is now Turkey, a land called Lydia, and he had a pretty good civil affairs campaign. He would go in and he would try to take the conquered people and immediately win them over to his side. That way he could get them to buy into his expanding empire, right? So we're talking about something as old as time itself. People should be winning people over by hearts and minds, but you do that by having more conversations, not less. Because you're not going to change somebody's mind by telling them to shut up. You're going to change their mind when you have something to say back to them that would make them change their mind.
And that's not happening today.
It's not happening today, and it's not happening. And Joe Rogan's not helping by apologizing for things, for a video that he admits was edited completely out of context. Now, if he doesn't want to say those words anymore, I'm with him on that, 100%. But the thing is context matters because truth matters. And if somebody is not a racist, you should not label them a racist, like we've seen in the case of these law professors who use these words in an academic setting in order to move the needle on an academic or a legal discussion in order to educate law students. You can't label them racist because it's not the context. The context is they're teaching a class where legal issues and racial issues have intersected, and they're studying it. And I don't know how people could be against that. Or in the case of this one teacher in, I think it was Texas. I'm just doing this from memory, this story. But, here's words we're not going to say. Oh, I can't believe you put that one word inside that list. You're a racist. No. That's not what I was trying to do. Like, you can't win. Yeah, you're fired. You can't win. You just can't win. And so my fear for Joe Rogan is that this clip actually makes its way to Libs of TikTok, because he's a big Libs of TikTok fan. And I just want to say this too. I am still a huge Joe Rogan fan. He has said things that I disagree with. He has said things that I find personally offensive. But what I've always appreciated about Joe Rogan is his willingness to have the conversations that other people won't have out of fear. And my hope for him is that he doesn't go down that road. Because once you apologize out of fear for the context that is missing, that you're afraid people are going to get a different idea, once you start apologizing for that, then they smell the blood in the water. They can taste it, and they keep coming for more.
And that's what you're saying this morning. That's what you're saying, is that he was some of the last that is going for it, and now he's showing fear. And maybe overstepping it.
That's what I'm afraid of. And I'm 100% with him. If there's things that you've said in the past that you don't say now, listen, that's part of growth. That's the story of my life too. There are things that I used to do that I don't do anymore. I'm a Christian, and Joe Rogan said some pretty offensive things about Christianity before. But the thing is the Bible does say this. When I became a man, I'm going to mess this quote up, but when I became a man, basically you put off things when you grow out of being a child. You put off childish things and you become a man. So life is about growth. And if that's what Joe Rogan's doing here, if that's why he doesn't use these words, then fine with that. I'm good with that. 100% support him. But what I don't support is saying that white people can't, there's no context in which this word can be used. These law professors, I'm with those law professors. I'm with those law professors that in that context, you ought to be allowed to say whatever you need to say in order to move that needle.
I'm giving you another minute, by the way, than what you thought. So did you want to play Libs of TikTok, or are we in between it?
I think we're in between it right now.
That's good too.
Listen, but what we're talking about today is we're talking about basically liberals of TikTok, because they're the ones that are coming after Joe Rogan. So next week, though, we 100% will be playing more clips from Libs of TikTok, and we're also going to talk a little bit more about what's going on in the state. We have a lot going on with these congressional maps and these state House and Senate maps that are being voted on. There's a huge divide in the state Senate right now. We have the conservatives. Seems like they're warring against the Republican establishment, who seems to be linking up with the left and the Democrats to run the Missouri General Assembly. This is not what Republicans voted for, so there's going to be a lot more to talk about where that's concerned too. Today was a little bit of a different day just because Joe Rogan, who I think is the tip of the spear on the free speech issue at this point in time, he seems to kind of really be feeling the pressure. So I'm going to pray for him, and I'm going to pray for our freedoms because I want to live in a country where people are free. All right, this is Paul Kurtman, News Talk STL. Make sure you come back and join us again this time next week, 101.9 and 94.1.
Perfect. Perfect.
All right.
We can get
Man.
We can get right at the top of the hour.
I tell you what. I'm a white guy. I shaved my beard.
I know you did.
My face is
You're
way more white than
More
it used
white.
to be.
Yes.
Way more white than it was.
Tim Jones and Chris Arps, weekdays at 3:30.
Hey, everybody, thanks for watching the video. And make sure you tune in again next week. And maybe I'll do some more of these clips during the week from my own home office. But really appreciate you. Really appreciate you tuning in here on Facebook. Make sure you come back and join us again. Go to paulkurtman.com. You can find some of the show notes. You can find that whole Joe Rogan clip that I kind of edited down and condensed a little bit for purposes of the show. Hope you all have a good day and a good weekend.